All right, so welcome to another deep dive, everybody. And today we are going to be looking at how language, something you use every single day, may actually be shaping how you think about the nature of reality itself.
And it's something we don't really think about a lot of the time,
Yeah.
how those words that we use have a very real impact on how we understand the world around us.
Yeah, I'm excited for this one. We're going to be diving into a fascinating lecture series called Signs, Mind, and Reality. And as you can probably tell from that title, things are going to get a little bit complex, but don't worry, we're going to break down the key ideas. Think of this deep dive as your crash course on linguistic signs.
Absolutely. And the lecture starts with a very kind of basic question.
Hmm.
What is a sign? We all kind of know a sign points to something.
Hmm.
But the traditional definition, the signifier and the signified, that doesn't give us the whole picture. And the lecture series kind of hints at something called the linguistic wall that actually impacts our thinking.
Linguistic wall. Whoa, that sounds kind of intimidating. What exactly does that mean?
Well, think of it this way. The language that you speak, with all of its specific words and rules, acts like a filter. It kind of shapes how you see and understand the world. So it's not that the words simply reflect reality, they actively shape it.
So if I'm understanding correctly, the words we use don't just describe the world, they actually define how we experience it.
That's exactly right. To understand how this works, we need to look at two contrasting views on signs. Saussure's and Peirce's. Saussure believed that signs are arbitrary, while Peirce saw them as clues about real relationships in the world.
Okay, I need an example. How does that actually play out in language that we use every day?
So take the word tree. Saussure would argue that there's no inherent connection between the sounds tree and the physical object of the tree, the plant. It's just a convention that we've all agreed on. Different languages have different words for tree, but they all refer to the same thing.
So Pierce would say there's something about the word tree that makes it, actually makes it relate to the object itself. But Saussure would say, no, 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 that's just completely arbitrary. Like we just randomly decided to use those sounds.
Exactly. And this lecture series, leans more toward that Saussurean view, especially when we talk about language.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. Gato in Spanish means cat. Chat in French means cat. And those words sound nothing alike.
So would you say that that arbitrariness of language kind of reinforces the idea of this linguistic wall? Because if the sounds that we use are, kind of random in a sense, that means different languages could come up with totally different ways of describing the same reality.
Yeah, that's a really insightful observation, and it leads us to a really interesting problem that the lecture series calls the anomaly of meaning. Think about the word bank, for example.
Oh, yeah, like I went to the bank to deposit a check versus I took a walk along the bank of the river. So same word, two totally different meanings.
Yeah, exactly. And this raises a question. Do all meanings of a word have to share some kind of core essence? And the lecture argues, no, they don't. And a great example is the English spill versus how it works in Russian.
Okay, what's up with spill in Russian? This is intriguing.
So in English, spill covers both liquids and powders, right? Like you can spill the coffee, you can spill the flour, but Russian has two different words for that, one specifically for liquids and another specifically for powders.
Oh, wow. So the Russian language forces you to think about spills differently than, how we would in English, right? We have to make this distinction that we wouldn't normally make. So does this mean that their linguistic wall is different from ours?
That's a really, really great point. This difference highlights the lecture's central argument. Meaning is defined by the differences between signs, not by some inherent property of the word itself. Think of it like a map. So countries get their meaning from their boundaries, not some internal countryness.
Oh, I love that. Like, English lumps both liquids and powder, spills together with one word, but Russian draws a line and says, no, we're separating those with two words. And the meaning comes from those boundaries, those differences, and how those languages carve up reality.
Yeah, you got it. And this leads us to a big idea in linguistics, the principle of differences.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to be the foundation for understanding how language can really shape our thinking.
Okay, so my mind is officially blown. So the principle of differences, like you're saying, shows how different languages, literally carve up reality in different ways. But how does this actually play out in like, the nitty-gritty of language, like grammar, sentence structure, that kind of stuff?
That's where it gets even more fascinating, honestly.
Yeah.
So the lecture goes on to talk about how this principle operates at the level of grammar, and it introduces a really key distinction,
Mm.
lexical signs versus structural signs.
Okay, break that down for me. Like, what's the difference between those two?
So imagine you're building a house. Lexical signs, those are like the bricks, the concrete, the wood,
Mm-hmm.
the actual building blocks of meaning. They're your nouns, verbs, adjectives, like those words that you use to express very specific concepts.
Okay, so those are like the content words, the ones that carry like the main information. So what about structural signs? Are those like the mortar that holds all
Yeah,
those pieces together?
exactly. Structural signs are the glue of language. Prepositions, conjunctions, all those little grammatical markers that tell you about like tense or number or case. Um, they provide the framework for how those lexical signs all fit together.
Okay, I see. So if lexical signs are kind of like the what of language, then structural signs are the how. They tell us how the pieces relate to each other. But how does this tie back to, that principle of differences that we were talking about?
Well, the lecture series argues that structural signs, they actually interpret reality in a very different way than lexical signs. Lexical signs, they point directly to objects or actions or qualities in the world.
Right, right. Like tree refers to the tree, run refers to the act of running, blue describes, the color blue. But what about those structural words? Like how are they interpreting reality?
So structural signs, what they do is they interpret the products of that interpretation. They add a layer of meaning on top of that lexical layer. Think about these words: rotation, construction, and invitation.
Okay, those all sound like nouns, right? Like they refer to things.
They do. But the interesting thing is that their lexical components, so rotate, construct, and invite, those all refer to actions or processes. So you have this kind of tension between the structural meaning, which says thing, and then the lexical meaning, which says action.
Whoa, that's kind of trippy, right? So like it's almost as if the structural sign is imposing a different kind of interpretation on top of the lexical meaning. Does that happen a lot in language?
Well, the lecture argues that this tension, or what they call antinomy, is a fundamental feature of language. It's a reflection of how language imposes its own structure onto our experience of the world.
That's a pretty big idea, right? It's like language is playing a much more active role in shaping our thoughts than we realize. So, structural signs are adding this extra layer of meaning, but how do they actually work within like a sentence?
So that brings us to the concept of syntactic and paradigmatic meanings. Syntactic meaning has to do with the relationships between words in a sentence, like subject, object, verb, those kinds of things.
So syntactic meaning, that's basically grammar rules in action. Like it tells us how words connect to each other to make a meaningful sentence.
Exactly. Paradigmatic meaning, on the other hand, that's about the inherent properties of a word itself. So whether it's a noun, a verb, an adjective, and how it can fit into different, grammatical slots, think of it like the words, like ID card.
Okay, got it. So like a word's paradigmatic meaning tells us what kind of word it is and how it can function grammatically. And then its syntactic meaning tells us how it's actually being used in relation to other words in a sentence.
That's a great summary. The lecture really emphasizes that these two types of meaning, they're interconnected, but they're also distinct, and they both contribute to that overall meaning of the sentence.
This is really making me realize how much more is going on, like beneath the surface of language than I ever thought. It's not just about like individual words, it's about how they interact and fit into this, larger system of meaning.
And that system, with its intricate web of relationships between the words and the meanings, is ultimately what shapes our understanding of reality. And it all goes back to that linguistic wall that we were talking about before.
Yeah, that filter that kind of shapes our perception of reality, right? Based on the specific language that we speak. All right, so we've got lexical signs, structural signs, syntactic, and paradigmatic meanings. It's like we're peeling back the layers of language like an onion. What other surprises does this lecture series have in store for us? Wow, we've been on quite the linguistic journey, haven't we? Lexical signs, structural signs, syntactic and paradigmatic meanings. I gotta say, my head's spinning a little bit from all these new concepts, but in a good way. It's like learning a whole new language just to talk about language itself.
It's pretty meta, right? And we're not even done yet. Remember we talked about words acquiring new meanings through context, that layering effect called superposition. Well, the lecture kind of dives even deeper into that concept in this last part.
Right. It's fascinating how the meaning of a word can like shift and change, depending on how it's used. It's like words have all these like hidden depths, like icebergs floating in the ocean of meaning.
Exactly. The lecture argues that this process of superposition is like fundamental to how language actually works.
Yeah.
It's how words evolve and adapt to new situations.
So it's not just about words having like fixed meanings. It's about those meanings being fluid and constantly changing based on the context.
Exactly. Think back to our example of bake, right? You can bake a potato, you could bake a cake, both using the same word,
Yeah.
but the context adds that extra layer of specificity.
Yeah, like the core meaning of bake is still there, right? Like applying heat to food, but it's like the meaning is being like modified or refined by, what's actually being baked. So, are you saying that every time we use a word, we're actually like contributing to its evolution, adding our own little layer of meaning?
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, this process of superposition, it's happening all the time in language. It's how words acquire like new shades of meaning and even new grammatical functions.
So I'm starting to see now how language is this like incredibly dynamic system, right? It's constantly like changing and adapting to our needs. It's not just, a tool. It's almost like a living organism.
Yeah, that's a really insightful observation. And the lecture argues that this dynamic nature of language is actually one of the things that makes it so powerful. It's flexible, it's adaptable, and it can express an infinite range of thoughts and ideas.
So what you're saying is the more we use language, the more powerful it actually becomes. It's like we're all contributing to this like constantly evolving system of meaning, right?
Exactly. And that brings us back to one of the key takeaways from this whole deep dive. Language isn't just a mirror that reflects reality, it's a system of differences. And those differences shape how we see the world, how we understand the world. Remember that linguistic wall we were talking about?
Right, like that filter that kind of shapes our perception of reality based on the specific language that we speak. But you're saying that this wall isn't necessarily a bad thing, is it?
No, not at all. It's actually what makes language possible in the first place. It allows us to categorize and conceptualize our experiences.
Oh, okay, okay. So the linguistic wall, it gives language its power, but it also creates, it creates limitations, creates these boundaries that shape how we think. That's pretty mind-blowing. It's making me wonder, like, are there ways that we can become more aware of this wall to kind of like see beyond it and get a clearer view of reality as it is?
That's a great question, and I think that's one of the goals of studying semiotics, right? Becoming more conscious of how language works and how it influences our thinking. And by understanding these principles, we can start to question our assumptions and see the world from different perspectives.
Wow, this deep dive has been an incredible journey. It's honestly made me rethink like everything I thought I knew about language. It's not just, about words and grammar. It's about how those things shape our understanding of reality itself.
And that's the power of the deep dive, right? Taking those complex ideas and making them accessible, giving you the tools to, think critically and engage with the world in a deeper way.
I think we definitely achieved that today. I'm walking away from this deep dive with a whole new appreciation for the power and the complexity of language. It's definitely given me a lot to think about, and I'm sure our listeners feel the same way.
I hope so. And remember, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep into this fascinating world of language. You never know what you might discover out there.